never paid much attention to my neighbor, Greg. We lived on the same quiet street in a suburban part of Chicago for years, but we barely exchanged more than a nod when we saw each other. I'm Brandon, a 36-year-old graphic designer, and my life had always been pretty simple. Work, friends, and keeping to myself, nothing too exciting. But recently, something about Greg had been bothering me. Greg was strange. He always kept his curtains drawn, never had visitors, and left his house at odd hours. The neighborhood kids joked that he was a vampire or something, but I brushed it off. That was until I started noticing the smell. A foul, rotting stench that wafted through the air whenever the wind blew from Greg's direction. It started small at first, just a whiff now and then, but over time, it became unbearable. One evening, Greg did something he'd never done before. He invited me over for a drink. I was caught off guard. The guy had always kept to himself, so why the sudden change? Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just that I felt bad for judging him based on rumors, but I accepted his offer. I figured it couldn't hurt to get to know him a little better. When I stepped inside Greg's house, the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was much worse inside, like something had died and was just left there to rot. The air was heavy, and my stomach churned. Greg didn't seem to notice, though. He led me to his living room, where he had a few beers on the table. The conversation was awkward. Greg wasn't much of a talker, and the entire time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. At one point, Greg excused himself to grab more drinks from the kitchen, leaving me alone in the room. As I sat there, my eyes drifted to a door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, and a flicker of light spilled out from underneath. My heart pounded in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I got up and walked toward it. I knew I shouldn't have, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, and at first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then I noticed the walls, covered with photos. Photos of people I recognized, neighbors, a few of whom had gone missing over the past year. My stomach dropped. There were also bloody clothing, ropes, and tools scattered across a table, along with what looked like human teeth in a jar. My legs turned to jelly. Panic surged through me, and I spun around, ready to bolt. But there was Greg, standing in the doorway, holding a large knife. His face was calm, too calm, and that made it even more terrifying. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said quietly, stepping closer. I couldn't breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Somehow, I snapped out of it. I shoved past him with all the strength I had, not looking back as I sprinted out of the house and into the street. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I didn't stop until I was back in my own home, slamming the door shut behind me and locking every single bolt. The police came later that night after I called them, shaking and barely able to form words. They searched Greg's house and found everything. His sick collection of trophies, as they called it. They even found bodies buried beneath his floorboards. Greg was arrested, but the damage was done. Knowing I had lived next to a monster for all these years, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd never be safe again. Every creak, every shadow, made my heart race. The nightmares didn't stop. I moved out of that neighborhood a month later, but no matter where I go, I can't escape the memories of what I found in Greg's house. I still wonder if I'll ever feel safe again. Living in New York City, I had gotten used to the constant noise. Sirens, car horns, loud conversations. It was all part of the chaos. But there was one sound that always made me pause. It came from my neighbor's apartment, a young guy named Aaron. I'd see him around sometimes, nodding politely in the hallway, but we never spoke much. I didn't think much of him until the noises started. My name is Olivia, and I'm a 28-year-old nurse. I worked long shifts at the hospital, so when I was home, all I wanted was peace and quiet. But Aaron's apartment was anything but quiet. It started as loud thuds, like furniture being moved around, and what I thought were muffled arguments. I figured he and his girlfriend were just having one of those dramatic relationships you hear about. I let it go at first, assuming it was just another noisy neighbor situation. But one night, the sounds got worse. It was around 2 a.m., and I was trying to sleep before an early shift. That's when I heard it, screaming. It wasn't a normal argument. It sounded like someone was in real pain. Then came the loud bangs, like someone was being thrown against the wall. My heart raced as I sat up in bed, every instinct telling me something was wrong. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I threw on a jacket and headed next door. I knocked on Aaron's door, my hand shaking. No one answered. The screaming had stopped, and the apartment was eerily silent. I knocked again, harder this time, but still nothing. I stood there for a minute, listening, but it was like the whole place had gone dead. I went back to my apartment, feeling unsettled, but I convinced myself it was just another loud fight. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens outside my window. Police cars were everywhere, and the building was crawling with officers. My stomach dropped. I stepped outside and saw them taking a body bag out of Aaron's apartment. The whole floor was buzzing with whispers, people craning their necks to see what had happened. I found out later that Aaron had been found dead in his apartment, stabbed multiple times. His girlfriend, who I'd barely ever seen, was discovered hiding under the floorboards. She had been the one screaming. Apparently, Aaron had been abusing her for months, and that night she had snapped. She killed him in self-defense but had panicked and tried to hide his body. The police took her away, and the building fell into a stunned silence. I couldn't shake the cold chill that settled in my bones. All those nights I had heard the noises next door. I hadn't realized the nightmare that was unfolding just feet away from me. I felt sick knowing I had been so close to such horror and had done nothing. Every time I hear a thud or a loud noise now, I freeze, haunted by the memory of what happened that night. I still live in the same apartment, but it's never felt the same. The walls feel thinner now, and every sound carries a weight I can't ignore. I'll never forget the horror that was living right next door. I've always prided myself on noticing the little things. As an accountant, it's sort of my job. But nothing could have prepared me for what I noticed next door. I'm Jack, a 31-year-old guy living in a quiet neighborhood in Boston. It's one of those places where everyone keeps their lawns neat, and we all wave at each other but rarely talk. My next-door neighbor, Tom, was particularly meticulous. His lawn was always perfect, green, trimmed, and without a single weed. I admired that. But one day, Tom disappeared. His wife, Donna, told everyone he had left her. Just like that. I remember thinking how sudden it seemed. Tom didn't strike me as the type to just up and leave without a word. It nagged at me, but I tried to brush it off. Relationships fall apart sometimes, right? Then I started noticing something odd. Donna was still keeping the lawn up, but certain patches looked off. The soil seemed disturbed, like something had been dug up and hastily covered. At first, I figured maybe she was just gardening, grieving in her own way. But one night, I saw something that sent a chill down my spine. It was around 2 a.m. I had trouble sleeping and decided to get some fresh air. As I looked out my window, I saw Donna in the yard. She was hunched over, digging into the soil under the cover of darkness. Her movements were frantic, almost desperate. My heart started racing, and a knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't gardening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The next day, I couldn't focus on anything else. That image of Donna digging kept replaying in my head. Eventually, I called the police. I told them about Tom's sudden disappearance and what I had seen in the yard. They came by later that afternoon to investigate. I watched from my window as the officers started digging where I had seen Donna. My heart was in my throat when they found something. A body, wrapped in plastic, buried under the flower beds. It was Tom. Donna confessed to killing him during a heated argument and burying him herself, thinking no one would notice. I couldn't believe it. All this time, there had been something so dark, so sinister, hiding beneath the surface of that perfect lawn. I always thought I had an eye for detail, but I never imagined the truth would be buried right next door. Now, every time I look at my own yard, I can't help but wonder what else might be hidden in plain sight.